Ladies and gentlemen, Asian guy here. I need you to stop what you're doing and listen to me very carefully because something just happened that changes everything we thought we knew about the global financial system. The number I'm about to share with you isn't a prediction. It's a mathematical reality that just surfaced from the U.S. Treasury's own reporting system. $318 trillion. $318 trillion in total U.S. debt obligations. When you include unfunded liabilities, Social Security commitments, Medicare promises, and the shadow derivatives nobody talks about. This isn't the national debt they show you on the evening news. That's theater. That's the $34 trillion they admit to. What I'm talking about is the real number, the number that keeps Treasury officials awake at night, the number that leaked from a closed-door Congressional Budget Office briefing last week. But here's what terrifies me. This isn't just about America running out of money. This is about what happens when the world realizes the foundation of the global monetary system, the US dollar, is backed by promises that cannot possibly be kept. And when that realization hits, there's only one asset that governments and smart money turn to: silver. Think about the mathematics. The entire global GDP is roughly $100 trillion. America alone owes more than 3 times the economic output of planet Earth. This isn't a debt problem anymore. This is a physics problem. You cannot print your way out of $318 trillion without destroying the currency completely. But the Treasury thinks they can manage this crisis with more debt, more printing, more creative accounting. What they don't realize is that the market is already moving. The smart money isn't waiting for the official announcement of insolvency. They're positioning now while everyone else pretends the music won't stop. Here's what's happening behind the scenes. I have sources inside major sovereign wealth funds. They're all telling me the same story. The allocation committees are quietly shifting their dollar reserves into physical assets. Not gold. That's too obvious, too watched. They're moving into silver, industrial silver, strategic silver, the metal that powers the technology revolution and can't be printed by central banks. The Chinese figured this out first. Their silver accumulation over the past 18 months isn't about currency hedging, it's about survival. They know that when the dollar collapses under the weight of this $318 trillion obligation, the whole system resets. In that reset, countries with physical assets win. Countries holding promises lose everything. But there's a deeper game being played. The US government knows about this debt bomb. They've known for years, which is why they've been systematically draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, selling off land holdings, and quietly liquidating federal assets. They're not managing the debt. They're preparing for the collapse. Here's what they're not telling you. The Congressional Budget Office ran a classified simulation last month. They modeled what happens when interest payments on the national debt exceed total tax revenue. That threshold isn't theoretical anymore. We're 18 months away from that point, maybe less. When interest payments consume 100% of government income, the only options are default or hyperinflation. There is no third choice. The simulation results were so alarming that copies were immediately classified and distribution was limited to 15 people. But I've seen the executive summary. When the debt service crosses that line, when every dollar collected in taxes goes straight to bondholders, the government loses the ability to function. Military paychecks stop, Social Security stops, the entire federal apparatus freezes. What the simulation also revealed was the Treasury's contingency protocol, code name, Operation Sunset Shield. If debt service exceeds 95% of revenue, the Treasury is authorized to invoke emergency asset requisition powers. Not just gold, not just oil reserves, critical materials, strategic metals, including silver stockpiles held by private dealers, ETFs, and even individual collectors above certain threshold amounts. But here's the terrifying part. The simulation didn't just model financial collapse, it modeled resource competition. Because when the dollar fails, when America can no longer import goods with printed paper, the country that controls physical assets wins. And silver isn't just a monetary metal anymore, it's a strategic metal. Solar panels need it, electric vehicles need it, defense systems need it, 5G networks need it. The Pentagon understands this better than Wall Street. Their internal assessments show that silver consumption for military applications has tripled in the past 5 years. Missile guidance systems, electronic warfare platforms, satellite communications. All of it depends on silver, and all of it becomes impossible to maintain when the country that supplies 60% of global silver production decides they're not taking dollars anymore. But it goes deeper than military applications. The AI revolution everyone's talking about? It runs on silver. Data centers use 40% more silver per server than previous generation hardware. Quantum computing requires silver conductors that can't be substituted with copper or aluminum. The semiconductor shortage of 2021 was just a preview. When silver becomes scarce, when governments start hoarding it for strategic reasons, the entire digital economy comes to a grinding halt. And this is where it gets dangerous for the silver market. When you owe $318 trillion and control the world's reserve currency, you don't default quietly. You weaponize everything. You confiscate. You nationalize. The silver market, which has operated in the shadows for decades, suddenly becomes a national security issue. Look at the timing. The debt ceiling debates. The regional banking crisis. The commercial real estate implosion. These aren't separate events. They're symptoms of the same disease. The system is running out of collateral to back up the promises. And when you run out of collateral, you need assets that can't be debased, can't be printed, can't be promised away. Silver is that asset. But here's the trap. The moment the U.S. government realizes that silver is the escape hatch from their debt crisis, they'll move to control it. Executive orders, strategic stockpile declarations, export restrictions. They'll do whatever it takes to prevent the metal from flowing to their creditors. We're already seeing the warning signs. Classified briefings on critical mineral supply chains, the Pentagon's sudden interest in domestic silver production, quiet meetings between Treasury officials and mining executives. This isn't about industrial policy. This is about financial warfare preparation. The $318 trillion debt crisis isn't coming. It's here. It's just being managed through accounting tricks, derivative swaps, and monetary illusions. But mathematics don't lie. Physics don't negotiate. And when the weight of this obligation finally breaks the system, the scramble for real assets will be violent and fast. China knows this, Russia knows this, the oil producers know this. They're all quietly accumulating silver while pretending to care about trade balances, because they understand that when promises become worthless, only physical reality matters. But this isn't the first time a reserve currency has collapsed under the weight of impossible debt. The British pound held reserve status for over a century, right up until 1944, when the mathematics finally caught up with the empire. Britain owed more than they could ever repay. The Bretton Woods Agreement didn't create the dollar standard. It simply acknowledged that the pound was finished. Here's what the history books don't tell you about that transition. In the 2 years before Bretton Woods, while politicians were still pretending the pound was stable, smart money was flowing into physical assets. Not British assets, not pound-denominated assets. Physical commodities controlled by the rising power. America had the gold. America had the industrial capacity. America had the resources. Today, the script is flipping. China has the manufacturing. China has the rare earths. China has been accumulating silver for strategic reasons, while America has been selling it for financial engineering reasons. The strategic silver reserve that America maintained from 1946 to 2002? Gone. Sold off to balance budgets and fund operations. The country that's about to need silver most is the country that gave up its silver stockpile. This is why the timing matters. This is why the $318 trillion debt crisis isn't just an American problem. It's a global monetary reset. And in this reset, the countries holding real assets write the new rules. The countries holding promises watch their power evaporate. Russia learned this lesson in 1998 when their debt crisis destroyed the ruble overnight. They had promised to pay in rubles, but when the rubles became worthless, the promises became worthless too. Since then, Russia has been accumulating gold, silver commodities. Anything that can't be printed, can't be promised away, can't be defaulted on with accounting tricks. The silver market has been sleeping for years, boring, predictable, manipulated by banks who thought they could control it forever with paper contracts. But $318 trillion in unpayable debt changes everything. It makes silver not just a hedge against inflation, but a hedge against monetary collapse. And here's what keeps me awake at night. The supply isn't there. Global silver mining production is flat. Industrial demand is exploding. Investment demand is waking up. And now we have the most leveraged government in human history looking at silver as their exit strategy from an impossible debt situation. This creates a squeeze unlike anything we've seen before. Not just a price squeeze, but a physical squeeze. A strategic squeeze. When governments start competing for limited silver supplies, the rules of the market change completely. Price becomes secondary to availability. Think about what happened with lithium in 2021. Tesla needed it. China hoarded it. The price went from $8,000 per ton to $80,000 per ton in 18 months. But lithium was just for batteries. Silver is for everything. Every smartphone has it. Every computer has it. Every solar panel has it. Every electric vehicle has it. When governments panic, when they realize their entire technological infrastructure depends on a metal they don't control, the buying becomes desperate. The supply side tells an even darker story. Mexico produces 23% of global silver as a byproduct of other mining operations. Peru produces 13%. Both countries are looking at their own debt crises. Both countries are asking themselves why they should ship strategic materials to a country that owes $318 trillion and might never pay it back. When resource nationalism kicks in, when producing countries start keeping their silver for domestic use, the mathematical squeeze becomes a physical impossibility. We're already seeing the early stages. 3 major silver refineries have reported allocation delays, not production problems. Allocation delays. That's industry code for we're keeping the metal for priority customers. And who do you think the priority customers are? Government stockpile programs, defense contractors, strategic alliance partners. The London Bullion Market Association just published their quarterly allocation report. Usually a boring document full of statistics nobody reads. This time, buried in footnote 47 on page 83, there's a single line that changes everything. Physical delivery timeframes may be subject to extended delays due to supply chain prioritization protocols. That's not about shipping problems. That's about rationing. The writing is on the wall. The $318 trillion debt crisis isn't a future problem that smart policies can solve. It's a mathematical certainty that physics will resolve. And when physics takes over from politics, when reality replaces rhetoric, the rush into tangible assets will make every previous financial panic look like a minor inconvenience. The silver market isn't ready for this. The infrastructure isn't there. The supply chains aren't there. What we have is a tiny market about to absorb the panic of a $318 trillion debt crisis. The pressure will be biblical. But this story doesn't end with higher prices. The real story is about the transformation of the monetary system itself, about the end of the debt-based currency experiment that started in 1971, about the return to asset-backed money whether the authorities want it or not. The $318 trillion isn't just a number, it's a countdown clock. Every quarter that passes brings us closer to the moment when the illusion can no longer be sustained, when the market finally says no, when creditors demand real assets instead of more promises. And we know exactly when that moment arrives. The Treasury's own projections show that by Q3 2026, if current spending continues, debt service will consume 104% of federal revenue. That's the point of no return. That's when the mathematics of default become unavoidable. That's when every sovereign wealth fund, every central bank, every institutional investor realizes that dollars are just IOUs from a bankrupt entity. The smart money isn't waiting for Q3 2026. They're moving now, quietly, methodically. Converting dollar reserves into physical assets while the conversion is still possible, while silver dealers still have inventory, while governments still pretend the system is stable. And when that moment comes, when the greatest debt crisis in human history finally reaches its mathematical conclusion, the silver market won't just be at risk. It will be at the center of the largest wealth transfer the world has ever seen, from those who trusted paper to those who held metal. The question isn't whether this will happen. The mathematics guarantee it will happen. The question is whether you'll understand what's coming before the crowd figures it out. Because once the $318 trillion debt bomb explodes, once the scramble for real assets begins, the silver market will never be the same again.